SQL Database Programming. I am your host, SQL Trevor. In today's episode, I will define what a database is and introduce Microsoft's SQL Server. A database is a collection of objects. The most important of these objects are two-dimensional tables. The structure of a table is a series of columns and rows. The point where a row and a column intersect is known as a cell, C-E-L-L. In database parlance, that cell is also called a field. It is within these fields that tables store data. Each row of a table represents a record, and each record must be uniquely identifiable. The process of record identification is accomplished by means of a column known as an identification column. The fields of that column are known as primary keys. The data type of an identification column will typically be defined as an integer because integers offer better performance and simplicity. However, in some cases, a primary key can also consist of an alphanumeric data type. Matter of fact, the company for which I currently work, they have primary keys for their items that begins with 3 alphabetical characters, that is Tom, Boy, Alpha, or TBA, followed by a series of integers. That is what is known as an alphanumeric primary key. In fact, a primary key may also be a composite key consisting of 2 separate columns. What is critical when you design your keys is that the key must be unique and it cannot be null. The purpose of a database is to store, manage, and retrieve data. Finally, and in conclusion, each and every column of a table must be defined to store a specific data type. And now that a database has been defined, I will introduce you to Microsoft's relational database management system known as SQL Server. Let's get started. In this discussion of Microsoft SQL Server, it is somewhat limiting in that we don't have an introduction of SQL Server Management Studio preceding it, because Management Studio is the tool that is used in order for you to interface with SQL Server. However, I chose to introduce SQL Server by itself so that you can have a foundational knowledge of what SQL Server is and its functions. In the next video, I fully intend to introduce Management Studio and demonstrate how you interact SQL Server using Management Studio. Let's begin. Microsoft SQL Server is a relational database management system. Applications and tools like SQL Server Management Studio connect to SQL Server instance or database engine or a database and communicate using Transact SQL, which is Microsoft's implementation of standard ANSI structured query language. Since its inception in 1989, there have been several iterations of SQL Server over the years. As we speak, the current version is SQL Server 2025, which incorporates AI support. However, starting with SQL Server 2012, Microsoft divided SQL Server into two distinct categories. One, business intelligence, or BI, and two, the database engine. The database engine, or an instance of SQL Server as it's called, runs as a service on a host machine called a physical server. You can have multiple instances or database engines running on a single machine and operating independently and running simultaneously, side by side, with each instance or database engine operating and responsible for managing one or more databases. When we say SQL Server is a relational database management system, it means that structured query language, or SQL, is used to manage databases that organize data into tables with rows and columns, where the data is related or connected in meaningful ways. Instead of storing data as isolated files or documents, a RDMS, or relational database management systems such as SQL Server, structures data so that relationships between different pieces of information can be defined and enforced. Tables can be linked to each other through keys, like we mentioned before, primary keys, or foreign keys. Now, that's a term I did not mention prior, but a foreign key is simply a primary key that has been defined as primary in one table, but then that same key is used to create a link or a relationship with a second table, and in that second table, that key becomes a foreign key because that table will have its own primary key. So, structural query language is the language that is used to create, read, update, and delete data in relational tables. The relational database management systems enforces rules to keep data accurate and consistent, such as ensuring that relationships between tables are valid. For example, we spoke about tables prior. We we spoke about a row being a record. Every row in a table represents an individual record. When you populate a table with data, each table or each row must have its own unique primary key. If you have, say, row number 5 and row number 6 having the same primary key, the system will not allow for the database to be updated. It will generate an error and tell you that you have a duplicate key. By doing this, the relational database management system enforces rules that keeps the system unique and the information valid. In the next video, we shall introduce SQL Server Management Studio and demonstrate how you use that tool to interact with SQL Server to create databases and to create objects within a database. We thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you.